Hi, I'm Wanda from Alanda Craft, and today I'm going to show you how to make this quick and easy baby quilt. I've made mine using a layer cake, but you can use fabric from your stash. So let's get on and show you how to make it. So what you need to make this baby quilt are 16 10-inch squares. Now I'm using a Moda layer cake. You can use fabric that you have on hand, but you do need 16 10-inch squares. You're also going to need some material for your backing. So I've got this lovely pretty pink which will complement my squares, and you'll need some batting. Now once you have those three things together, what you need to do is lay out your squares in the pattern that suits you, and you can see in the quilt behind me that I've done that. I've laid it out, and when I came up with something I liked, then it was ready for me to sew. So you do that, go and lay your squares out, and then I'll show you how to put this together. Now once you've got your pieces laying out how you like, take a photo of them with your phone so that you can just keep track of how you're going when you start sewing this together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew the first row together, and we do that by taking these first two pieces and just lay them right sides together, match up the edges, and just sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Now I'll do it with those two squares, and I'll also do it with these other two squares. Then I'll sew the two lots of squares together, and that'll give me my first row. And I'm going to do that with each of my rows. Right, so I've sewn my rows together. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to press all the seams. So on our first row, we press the seams in one direction, and then on our next row, we press the seams in the opposite direction, and you keep doing that all the way down the rows, alternating how you press the seams. And we do that because we want the seams to all nest together and line up nicely. So I'll just turn that back. So now what I'm going to do is take my first row and lay it over my second row, and make sure you line everything up nicely. And this is where you can see that the seams will match up, will just nest in there together. And then what you're going to do is just put some pins in. Okay, so you come along, match the seams up first, and then pin the rest of it. So what I'll do is I'll finish pinning all that together so that it's nice and neatly lined up, and then I'm just going to sew the whole thing together with a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. So as you can see, I've sewn the top two rows together, and I've also gone ahead and sewn the bottom two rows together. So now all I need to do is just sew those together, and then my quilt top will be finished. So I just take this over, lay the rows together, and again do exactly the same thing. We're going to match up our seams, and we're going to just sew along here with a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so I've sewn my rows all together, and now my top piece is finished. Now, technically your quilt should measure 38.5 by 38.5, but sometimes your seams will be a little bit out. So make sure that you measure your top before you go cutting your batting and your backing. And you do that by measuring down the centre in both directions. Now mine's come out at 38.5 by 38.5, so I've cut my batting and my backing at 38.5. Now if you've got a nice big table, well and good. If you don't, just do what I've done. Lay it out on the floor, lay your piece of batting down, smooth your top piece over the top of the batting, and then just pull it back and give it a spray with some adhesive spray if you've got it. If not, you can just pin. Bring it back, and again just lay it down and smooth it all out. We'll do exactly the same with the other end. Just fold it back and give it a spray. Like that, and smooth it down. So now we lay the backing down on top of the main piece, and we have right sides together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all around the edge, right the way around with a 1/4 inch seam, but I'm going to leave an opening of about 5 or 6 inches, and I'll back stitch at each end. So I'll back stitch when I start off, and I'll sew all the way around. When I get to here, I'll back stitch again. We leave that opening so that we can turn the quilt through. So you can see here I've sewn with a 1/4 inch seam, and I've done that all the way around. I've gone off the edges here, so I sew my seam right to the edge and go off, and then start the new seam and come down. Now normally I would clip these corners, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it through and just make sure that everything's caught first. So I've left a nice wide opening here, about 6 to 8 inches. I'll just reach in and grab the corners. I used to leave a 4-inch opening, but I found that that got a little bit too much mucking around to try and pull the quilt through, so about 6 inches. It's quite a nice size. Okay, so just keep pulling it through. Always like this part, you can see what it's going to look like. Once I've got it through, I'm going to do just a quick check to make sure all the seams have caught in. Sometimes with some of these materials, this one's particularly slippery and it can slip when you're sewing, so I like to just check that everything's okay, and that looks fine. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just reach into each corner and clip it. And make sure you don't clip your stitching. Okay, so just clip across the corner, and I'm also going to just trim into the corner just to remove a little bit of that bulk. And I'll do that with all 4 corners. Now when you've clipped it, what you want to do is just get a skewer, or I use one of these wooden skewers, or a chopstick. You can use your scissors, but just be very careful that you don't poke the end of your scissors through your material. So I just use a skewer, and I'm just going to push through like that. And I'll do that with all 4 corners. And once I've clipped those corners, what I'll do is I'll just give this a press. Now I like to press this in so that it sits nice and flat, this opening, because then I'm going to sew around the edge with about 1/8 of an inch, a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch, all the way around, just so that that seam all sits nice and flat. So I've sewn all the way around with about 1/8 of an inch, and you can see that here, and that just neatens that off, and it also catches in your opening, so that's not going to flap around and open. Now to finish this quilt, you can do a number of things. You can stitch in the ditch, which is simply coming down the middle of the seam and doing that all the way down along each of the seam lines, and I've done that in the one behind me. Or what I'm thinking I'll do with this one is actually to go the width of my sewing foot and just come out about 1/4 of an inch from the seam line and sew down either side, and I'll do that all the way down the row and then all the way across. Or alternatively, you could just do some diagonal lines and end up with a cross in the middle of the square. So you can do what you like to finish it off. You don't want to do too much quilting because of the method that we've used to put it together. I started sewing this, and then I thought that maybe you might be interested in just seeing what I'm doing. So I start in the middle of the quilt, and what I've done is I've lined up my 1/4 inch line on my foot, which you can see here, there's one on either side, and I'll show you that in a moment in action. And I've just sewn with that going down the seam line so that I get the seam on, and I do it on either side. When I get to the end here, I just stop at where I've got my 1/8 of an inch seam that goes around the edge, and I sew along, and then I turn and I come up the other side. So I'll just show you quickly here. There's my 1/4 inch marking on my foot. I just line it up with my seam line, and I'm just going to start sewing down there. And as I say, when I get to the bottom, I'll just sew across and finish it off. Now I use back stitch when I start and finish on this. It's not a show quilt, it's going to be a functional quilt, so I'm not really worried about double stitch lines at the ends of those rows. So I just thought I'd show you that. So I finished quilting the quilt, and I think it looks really great, and I love these colours. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Now don't forget, you can also catch us on Facebook and Instagram, and check out the written instructions on our website at www.alandacraft.com.